Tom was known across Maple Valley as the giant cowboy. He was tall enough to look over fences without trying, and strong enough to lift heavy sacks of grain with one arm. People often said he looked serious, but those who knew him well understood that he had a gentle heart. Tom lived alone on a quiet ranch outside the town. He spent his days caring for animals, fixing old tools, and helping anyone who needed support. Even though he was large and powerful, he never used his strength to scare or harm. Instead, he used it to protect and rescue. One warm afternoon, Tom decided to visit the small animal auction that took place every month on the edge of town. He did not go there to buy strong animals for work like most people. He went there to check if any animal had been left behind, hurt, or unwanted. He had a habit of taking home creatures that others ignored. He believed every living being deserved care. When he reached the auction, he saw a crowd gathered around a wooden stage. People held small papers with numbers and waited for the auctioneer to call out prices. The smell of dust and hay floated in the air. Some people talked loudly while others moved from one pen to another. Tom stood at the back of the crowd, watching quietly. His hat shaded his eyes from the sun. He had seen many auctions before, and knew that the last animals of the day were often the ones in need. The auctioneer continued working. He brought out goats, hens, and a few young sheep. People raised their hands and shouted prices. Each animal found a buyer quickly. Tom did not move. He was waiting for the end. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the auctioneer finally announced that only one more animal remained. People shifted their attention, expecting another sheep or calf. Instead, a man walked onto the stage holding a tiny puppy by the scruff of its neck. The small animal had a sack tied loosely over its head. The cloth covered its face completely. The puppy's legs wobbled as it was placed on the stage. It took a few steps and stumbled. Some people in the crowd were confused. Others shook their heads or looked away. A few laughed softly because they thought the puppy looked strange. Tom's eyes narrowed. He did not like what he was seeing. He stepped a little closer, but he stayed quiet and watched. The auctioneer sighed. He explained that the puppy had been found near an old barn outside the valley. No one knew where it came from. The farm that discovered it did not have space to care for it. The sack had been placed over its head because the puppy became frightened by noise and kept running in circles. The man insisted that the sack was not tied tightly, but it still looked wrong to Tom. The auctioneer started the bidding with a very low price. He waited for a hand to rise, but the crowd remained silent. People whispered among themselves. Some said the puppy looked weak. Others said it might be sick or too much trouble to care for. A few simply did not want a small animal that needed attention when they were looking for strong animals for work. No one lifted a hand. The puppy trembled. Its tiny tail pressed close to its legs. Its small paws moved uncertainly on the wooden surface. Even though the sack covered its eyes, the puppy seemed to sense the crowd's rejection. Tom felt something move inside his chest. It was the same feeling he often had when he saw someone or something being ignored. He took a slow breath and stepped forward. His boots made soft sounds on the ground. The auctioneer looked hopeful when he saw the giant cowboy approaching. Tom raised his hand. His voice was steady and clear as he offered $1. The crowd turned toward him. Some people were surprised. Others smiled because they knew Tom always rescued animals like this. No one else made a bid. The auctioneer lifted his hammer and struck it down once, ending the sale. The sound echoed across the stage. The puppy was now his. Tom walked to the stage and nodded politely to the auctioneer. The man who brought the puppy handed it to Tom with a quick shrug. As Tom lifted the small creature into his arms, he felt how light it was. The puppy shivered, but it did not try to run. Tom stepped off the stage and gently loosened the sack with careful fingers. When he removed it, a small brown puppy blinked up at him. Its eyes were round and uncertain. Its ears were soft and hung to the sides. The puppy looked frightened at first, but when Tom touched its head softly, it let out a tiny sound and leaned against his chest. Tom looked around to find a quiet corner away from the noise. He sat on a wooden bench and let the puppy rest on his lap. He asked the man who handled the puppy earlier why the animal had been treated this way. The man explained that it was found alone and weak. It did not eat much and would cry at night. No one wanted to spend time helping it grow stronger, so it was brought to the auction in hopes someone might take it. Tom listened and nodded. He stroked the puppy gently. The puppy relaxed more with every passing moment. Tom decided to give it a name right then. He whispered the name Bud. It was simple, warm, and friendly, just like he wanted the puppy's new life to be. As the auction came to an end, people packed their things and left. Tom remained seated for a while, letting Bud get used to his touch. When the puppy finally lifted its head and looked around, Tom wrapped it in a small blanket he kept in his saddlebag. He carried Bud to his horse and climbed up slowly, keeping the puppy close against him. The ride home was peaceful. The sky turned orange as the sun set behind the hills. Bud peeked out from the blanket, watching the fields pass by. The soft rustling of the breeze and the steady rhythm of the horse's steps seemed to calm him. By the time they reached the ranch, Bud had fallen asleep again. Tom carried him inside with great care. He prepared a small bed near the warm fireplace and placed Bud gently on it. The puppy curled up without fear. Tom watched him for a moment and felt a quiet happiness spread through his heart. He had spent only $1, but he knew he had gained something priceless. A new story had begun on that warm afternoon. A story that would change both their lives in a way Tom had not yet imagined. Bud woke up the next morning to a warm light shining through the small window of Tom's ranch house. The soft crackle of the fireplace filled the room. For a moment Bud did not remember where he was. He blinked slowly and lifted his head. The blanket under him was softer than anything he had ever felt before. The smell of clean wood and fresh air made him feel safe. Tom was already awake. He stood near the kitchen counter, pouring warm milk into a small bowl. When he noticed Bud moving, he walked toward him with a calm and gentle step. Tom knelt next to the small bed and spoke in a low voice that carried no fear. Bud tilted his head. He was still unsure if he should trust this giant man, but something in Tom's presence made him feel comfortable. Tom placed the bowl in front of him and waited. Bud sniffed it first. The warm smell filled his nose. Slowly he took a small sip. The warmth spread through his little body. For the first time in a long while, Bud felt safe enough to drink without fear. Tom smiled with relief. He stayed beside Bud while the puppy finished the milk. When Bud lifted his head again, a small drop of milk stayed on his nose. Tom gently wiped it with a corner of the blanket. Bud did not pull back. He looked into Tom's kind eyes and felt a new sense of trust forming. After breakfast, Tom carried Bud outside to show him the ranch. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds sat on the fence and sang quietly. The tall grass behind the barn moved gently with the breeze. Bud looked around with wide, curious eyes. Everything was new to him. He stayed close to Tom as they walked toward the open field. The ranch was peaceful. Wooden posts lined the fences. A small group of chickens scratched the ground near the barn. Tom's old horse, Mira, stood under a tree. When she saw Tom, she let out a soft neigh. Bud stared at her with surprise. She lowered her head slowly, sniffing Bud with her warm breath. Bud shivered at first, but then wagged his tail very softly. Mira nudged him gently, as if welcoming him. Tom watched them from a few steps away. He felt a warm pride. The ranch animals trusted his judgment. If he brought someone new to the ranch, they accepted that newcomer too. Bud's first meeting with Mira gave Tom hope that the puppy would adjust well. Tom placed Bud on the soft grass. The puppy walked in small steps, sniffing everything. He touched his nose to the ground, the fence post, and even a small wildflower. Every new smell interested him. His ears perked up every time he heard a distant sound. Tom followed him with slow, steady steps, making sure Bud did not wander off. Soon Bud grew tired. His steps became slower. Tom picked him up again and carried him back inside the house. He prepared a small bed of hay and cloth near the fireplace. Bud curled into the soft nest and dozed off. Tom sat on a nearby chair and watched him with quiet care. He knew Bud needed rest and time to regain strength. The next few days followed a gentle routine. Tom fed Bud on time, gave him clean water, and let him explore the ranch little by little. Each day Bud grew braver. He learned the sound of Tom's footsteps and followed him wherever he went. Tom would walk across the yard to check on animals or fix a fence, and Bud would trail behind him, his small paws tapping on the ground in a steady rhythm. One morning Tom worked on repairing a broken gate near the barn. Bud watched from a short distance. The sun shone brightly, and Bud's shadow followed him as he walked around. After a while Tom noticed Bud dragging a small stick toward him. The stick was longer than Bud's body, but he still tried to bring it like a helpful assistant. Tom laughed softly and took the stick from him. Bud wagged his tail with pride. As days passed, Bud started showing more confidence. He would run in short bursts across the field. Sometimes he chased his own tail. Other times he barked at butterflies that flew too close. Each new moment filled him with joy. Tom often sat on the porch in the evening, watching Bud explore. The puppy's playful spirit brought life to the quiet ranch. One afternoon something unexpected happened. Bud heard a strange rustling sound near the chicken pen. His ears stood up. He walked toward the fence and barked. It was not a loud bark, but it was enough to alert Tom. Tom came outside quickly. He saw a fox near the pen. The fox froze when it noticed Tom. With a firm step Tom moved toward it. The fox turned and ran across the field until it disappeared behind the trees. Bud kept barking until the danger was gone. Tom lifted him gently and praised him. Bud felt proud. That day Tom realized Bud was not only growing stronger but also becoming protective of the ranch. His small size did not stop him from trying to help. Every night Bud slept near Tom's boots. The warmth from the fireplace, the calm of the ranch, and Tom's presence made Bud's world feel complete. Tom would pat Bud's head before going to sleep, and Bud responded by curling closer. One evening Tom sat on the porch with Bud on his lap. The sky turned orange and pink as the sun set behind the hills. Bud rested his small head on Tom's arm. The wind carried the scent of hay and wildflowers. Tom thought about the day he saw Bud at the auction. It had only been a short time, yet Bud had already become a part of his daily life. Tom whispered Bud's name softly. Bud lifted his head and gave a tiny lick on Tom's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it touched Tom deeply. He knew Bud trusted him completely now. As the sun disappeared, Tom stood up and carried Bud inside. The little puppy was half asleep in his arms. Tom placed him in his small bed, waited until Bud settled down, and then dimmed the lamp. The ranch grew quiet as night fell. Bud slept peacefully, no longer afraid, no longer alone. His life had changed because one person cared enough to give him a chance. Tom watched over him from the doorway, his heart filled with a gentle warmth. Their bond had grown strong, and this was only the beginning of their journey together. Days passed gently on Tom's ranch, and Bud grew stronger with each sunrise. The little puppy who once trembled at every sound now moved through the house with confidence. He followed Tom from morning until night, learning the rhythm of ranch life. Every new day brought new sights, new scents, and new moments that shaped Bud into a brave and joyful companion. One bright morning Tom prepared to start his chores. He opened the wooden door, and Bud rushed outside with excitement. The sun was rising over the hills, spreading a golden glow across the field. Dew sparkled on the grass like tiny crystals. Bud stepped carefully at first, feeling the cool wet ground under his paws. Then, with a burst of energy, he ran in circles. Tom watched him with a warm smile. Today was an important day. Tom needed to check the far side of the ranch where the fences were old. He planned to take Bud along so the puppy would get used to longer walks. Tom believed Bud was strong enough to handle the journey. He placed a small pouch of food in his saddlebag and filled a canteen with water. Mira, Tom's loyal horse, stood near the barn, ready for the ride. She lowered her head when Tom approached, and Bud jumped back a little before remembering she was friendly. Tom lifted Bud and placed him gently on the saddle in front of him. Bud sat up proudly, looking like a tiny king riding his great horse. They began their ride across the fields. The breeze carried the scent of pine trees and wildflowers. Bud's ears flapped slightly in the wind. He enjoyed the movement of the horse and the changing view around him. The distant hills rose tall and calm, and the open land stretched in wide, peaceful silence. Tom stopped near each fence post, checking the wood and tightening loose wires. Bud watched carefully from the saddle, tilting his head as if studying Tom's work. At one point Tom placed Bud on the ground so he could stretch his legs. Bud sniffed around, discovering small rocks, grass patches, and even a tiny beetle making its way across the dirt. Bud barked at it, but the beetle continued on without worry. Tom chuckled and called Bud back. After an hour of riding and working, Tom reached the far corner of the ranch. This area was quiet and more hidden by trees. The shade made it cooler than the open field. As Tom inspected the fence, Bud suddenly froze. His ears lifted and turned to the side. He heard a faint sound coming from behind the bushes. Bud took a cautious step forward. Tom noticed his change in behavior and followed him. The sound came again, soft and weak, like a cry. Tom pushed aside a branch and saw a small white lamb tangled in old wire. The lamb struggled but could not move. Bud barked lightly, worried and alert. Tom knelt beside the lamb and spoke in a calm voice to soothe it. He removed the wire carefully, making sure not to hurt the young animal. Bud stayed close, touching his nose to the lamb's head as if telling it everything would be fine. After a few moments Tom freed the lamb. The animal stood shakily, but it was safe. Tom looked around and saw a pasture on the other side of a small hill. He guessed the lamb had wandered away from its flock. Tom lifted it gently and carried it toward the pasture. Bud followed close behind, occasionally glancing back to make sure the area was clear. When they reached the pasture, an older shepherd approached them. He looked relieved when he saw the lamb. He thanked Tom for bringing it back. Bud sat proudly beside Tom, tail wagging. The shepherd petted Bud gently and said the puppy had a brave heart. Tom felt a quiet pride at those words. After saying goodbye to the shepherd, Tom and Bud resumed their journey across the ranch. The sun had risen higher, warming the land. Bud climbed back onto the saddle and rested while Tom rode across the field. The rescue had made Bud tired, but it had also given him a sense of purpose. Tom could feel the puppy's small heartbeat against his arm. When they reached home, Bud jumped off the saddle and ran toward the house. Tom led Mira back to the stable, gave her fresh water, and brushed her gently. Bud watched from the doorway, his eyes full of admiration. Tom always treated animals with care, and Bud was beginning to understand the meaning of kindness by observing him. Inside the house, Bud curled up near the fireplace. Tom prepared lunch and placed a small bowl of food next to Bud. The puppy ate happily and then rested. Tom sat on a chair with a cup of warm tea, thinking about the morning. He looked at Bud and felt a deep sense of comfort in knowing the puppy was becoming more than a companion. Bud was becoming family. In the afternoon, Tom decided to train Bud with small tasks. He took him outside and placed a stick on the ground. Tom stepped back and called Bud. Bud ran to him with excitement. Tom pointed at the stick and encouraged him to pick it up. Bud tried several times before grabbing it with his tiny teeth. He carried it proudly to Tom. Tom praised him, and Bud's tail moved faster than ever. They practiced simple tasks for a long time. Bud learned to respond to Tom's voice, follow hand signs, and stay still when needed. Tom was patient, and Bud was eager. Every small success filled Bud with confidence. As the sky turned orange again, Tom and Bud walked toward the porch. Tom sat on the old wooden chair, and Bud curled up on his lap. The evening breeze brushed gently across the land. Birds returned to their nests. The ranch grew quiet except for a few soft sounds from the barn. Tom stroked Bud's fur. He thought about the day he first saw the puppy on the auction stage. He remembered the sack over Bud's head and how the crowd ignored him. It felt like a distant memory now. Bud had grown not only in strength but also in spirit. He was gaining courage, trust, and loyalty. Bud lifted his head, looked at Tom, and rested it again on Tom's arm. There was peace in his eyes, a peace he had never known before. Tom knew the puppy felt safe. That was all he ever wanted. Night slowly settled over the ranch. Tom carried Bud inside and placed him in his bed. The puppy curled comfortably and closed his eyes. Tom watched him for a moment before turning off the lamp. Bud slept deeply, dreaming of open fields, bright mornings, and the gentle giant who had given him a home. Their bond was stronger than ever, and their journey together had only just begun. The next week arrived with bright sunlight and clear skies. Bud had grown even more active during the past days. His confidence showed in every step he took around the ranch. Tom noticed that the puppy now reacted quickly to sounds, followed instructions with eagerness, and felt brave enough to explore places he once feared. The ranch had become his world, and he treated every corner of it with excitement. Tom planned a longer ride across the valley to check the distant fences and the water troughs that served the cattle during summer. It was a long trip, but he believed Bud was ready. Bud sensed the preparation and bounced around Tom with small, happy barks. He watched closely as Tom packed tools, food, and a rope into his saddlebag. When Mira walked out from the stable, Bud ran up to greet her. She lowered her head and sniffed him gently. Bud wagged his tail and circled her legs. Tom laughed softly and lifted Bud onto the saddle. Bud sat proudly between Tom's arms, his eyes shining with curiosity. The ride began early in the morning. The sunlight painted the land in warm gold. Birds flew above them. The valley stretched wide with rolling hills, tall grass, and peaceful shadows cast by scattered trees. Bud felt the wind on his face and lifted his head higher, taking in every sound and scent. Tom guided Mira along a narrow path that crossed a shallow stream. Bud watched the water flow under her hooves. He leaned slightly forward, fascinated by the ripples. Tom held him steady so he would not slip. Once they reached the other side, Bud looked back as if thinking about the moving water. Every new sight added a fresh memory to his small mind. They reached the first fence line and began their work. Tom set Bud on the ground and checked the wooden posts. Bud sniffed every spot, learning the place. Whenever Tom stopped to fix a loose wire, Bud sat near him and observed with focused eyes. It was as if he wanted to understand everything Tom did. After an hour, the sun had risen higher. Tom decided they should rest under a tree nearby. He placed Bud on the grass and handed him a small piece of bread soaked lightly in water to make it easy to chew. Bud ate happily while Tom drank from the canteen. Mira grazed slowly on the shade's edge. The valley felt calm. Just as Tom prepared to continue the journey, Bud suddenly lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the left side of the field. Tom noticed the change in his posture. Bud began walking toward a cluster of bushes with small, careful steps. Tom followed him without rush. Bud stopped near a fallen branch and barked once. Tom stepped closer and listened. A low soft sound came from behind the branch. When Tom moved it aside, he saw an injured young horse lying on the ground. It was thin and exhausted. Its mane was tangled, and its breath was labored. Tom knelt beside the horse and examined it. A part of its leg was caught in a broken rope, and it looked like it had been struggling for hours. Bud moved close and sniffed the horse gently, then sat down as if trying to comfort it with his presence. Tom took out his small knife and carefully cut the rope. He spoke softly to calm the animal. Once the leg was free, the horse tried to stand but failed. Tom realized it needed water and rest. He poured some water into his hat and brought it near the horse's mouth. The horse drank slowly. Bud stayed near the horse, his eyes full of concern. He touched the horse's nose lightly with his own. The action was small, but it brought comfort. Tom watched Bud and felt proud again. Bud's heart was gentle, and he cared deeply for others, just like Tom hoped he would. Tom knew he could not leave the horse alone. He tied a long rope to Mira and secured the other end around the weakened horse's chest in a way that would not cause pain. Slowly and patiently, he encouraged the horse to rise. With great effort and steady help from Tom, the young horse stood. Tom led Mira forward at a slow pace, and the rescued horse followed step by step. Bud trotted beside them, staying alert. They walked until they reached the shepherd's camp near a group of trees. Several horses grazed there peacefully. A young worker noticed Tom approaching and hurried over. When he saw the weak horse, he gasped in relief. He explained that the horse had wandered off early in the morning, and they had been searching for it. Tom handed the rope to the worker, who thanked him repeatedly. The worker knelt to pet Bud and said the puppy was as brave as his owner. Bud wagged his tail proudly. After making sure the horse was safe, Tom resumed his journey across the valley. Bud seemed energized by the rescue. He sat upright on the saddle, watching the land with sharp eyes. The bond between him and Tom had grown even stronger after working together to help another creature. As the day continued, they checked more fences, fixed loose boards, and made sure the water troughs were clean. Bud learned more with every stop. He followed Tom's signals, waited patiently when needed, and explored small areas without wandering too far. When the sun began to sink, the valley turned warm with shades of orange and red. It was time to head home. Tom lifted Bud again and hugged him close. The puppy rested comfortably in his arms as Mira began the journey back to the ranch. The ride home was peaceful. Bud rested but kept his eyes open, watching the land pass slowly. The quiet beauty of the valley filled his mind. The soft rhythm of Myra's steps made him feel calm. Tom occasionally lowered his hand to stroke Bud's back, and the puppy leaned into the touch. When they reached the ranch, the sky was filled with deep colors of dusk. Tom dismounted and set Bud on the ground. Bud stretched his legs, then ran happily toward the porch. Mira went to the stable, and Tom followed to remove her saddle and give her water. Inside the house, Tom prepared a warm meal for both himself and Bud. The puppy ate with contentment and then rested near the fireplace. Tom sat on the chair beside him, thinking about the long day. He realized Bud was no longer just a weak puppy he found at an auction. He was becoming a loyal helper and a trusted friend. Later that night, Tom carried Bud to his small bed. The puppy curled up on the blanket and closed his eyes. Tom watched him for a moment before turning off the lamp. The gentle sound of crickets filled the quiet house. Bud slept peacefully, dreaming of open fields, rescued animals, and the steady presence of the giant cowboy who had changed his life. The day had been full of adventure, and more adventures were waiting for them in the days to come. The next morning came with a soft light spreading slowly across the quiet land. Rafi woke up early as he always did. He stepped outside and stood on the wooden porch of his small house. The air felt calm and fresh. The fields in front of him looked peaceful. For a moment he simply enjoyed the silence. It was the kind of silence that made him feel thankful for his life. But today there was also something new in that silence. There was a soft sound of paws moving around near his feet. It was the puppy. The same small puppy he had brought from the auction for $1. The same puppy that had a sack on its head in the beginning. Now the puppy stood beside him with bright eyes and a happy little tail. Rafi looked down at him and smiled. He had named him Manu a few days ago. The name felt simple and warm. Manu had grown more active with each passing day. His fear had faded away. His trust in Rafi grew strong. Rafi bent down and picked him up in his arms. Manu gave a tiny playful bark. Rafi laughed softly as he walked back inside to prepare breakfast. He had many chores to do today, but he wanted to start the day with a calm moment with Manu. As he cooked a simple meal, Manu sat near his feet. He looked around the house with curious eyes. Sometimes he followed Rafi from one corner to another. Sometimes he lay down and watched everything quietly. Rafi placed his plate on the small table and kept a small bowl of food for Manu as well. Manu wagged his tail fast and ate happily. Watching him eat made Rafi feel peaceful. He had not expected this tiny puppy to bring such warmth into his life. But that was what had happened. This small animal had changed the feeling of the house. It no longer felt like a lonely place. After breakfast, Rafi stepped outside to check the fences around his land. He carried Manu in his arms because the grass was still wet. The morning sun rose slowly. It spread a warm golden shade across the land. Manu lifted his head to feel the sunlight. Rafi looked at him and felt a quiet joy in his heart. He walked along the fence line and checked each wooden post. The fence was old but still strong enough. While he worked, he kept talking to Manu in a soft voice. Manu listened even when he did not understand the words. But he understood the kindness. He understood that Rafi cared for him. After finishing the fence check, Rafi walked to the stable. Inside stood his gentle horse Below. Below moved his head as soon as he saw Rafi. He made a soft sound of greeting. Rafi rubbed his neck with calm strokes. Manu looked at the horse with wide eyes. He was still learning which animals were friendly. Rafi laughed and lifted him a little higher to show him Below properly. Manu relaxed when he saw that Rafi trusted the horse. Rafi spent a long time in the stable brushing Below. Manu sat nearby and watched everything. The scene looked peaceful and complete. It was clear that Rafi was not alone anymore. Later in the day, Rafi took Manu for their daily walk across the land. The fields stretched wide with open space. The wind moved gently through the tall grass. Manu walked beside Rafi with short steps. His small paws made light prints on the soil. Sometimes he stopped to sniff a plant. Sometimes he chased a falling leaf. Rafi allowed him to explore, but kept a close eye on him. He wanted to keep him safe. As they walked farther, Manu grew more confident. He ran ahead for short distances and looked back to make sure Rafi was still close. Every time he saw Rafi behind him, he continued running in cheerful steps. Rafi enjoyed watching him. He felt that Manu was finally learning what freedom felt like. A few weeks ago, this puppy had stood at an auction with a sack on his head. No one wanted him. People had looked at him with doubt. No one had seen his worth. But now Rafi could see his bright spirit clearly. Manu was smart. Manu was kind. Manu had a strong heart. He had survived fear and confusion. Now he lived with trust and joy. Rafi felt proud of him. He felt proud of taking the chance that day at the auction. When they reached the far side of the land, Rafi sat under a large tree. Manu ran around the tree for a few minutes. Then he came to Rafi and lay down beside him. Rafi gently petted his head. Manu closed his eyes and relaxed. The wind kept moving across the open space. Birds flew high above them. The sky slowly changed shades as the sun moved higher. Rafi enjoyed every moment. He knew peace was a gift, and today he felt it fully. After resting under the tree, Rafi started walking back home. Manu followed him happily. When they reached the house, Rafi filled a small bucket with clean water for the puppy. Manu drank with quick little sips. Then he lay on the porch in the sunlight. Rafi sat beside him on the step. He looked at the fields and thought about the journey they had both taken. It felt almost unbelievable how a simple moment at an auction had changed everything. $1 had brought him a friend. One small act had filled his home with life again. As the afternoon passed, Rafi worked on a few chores. He cleaned the tools in the shed. He collected dry wood for the night. He checked the water barrel. Manu followed him through each task. Sometimes he sat in the shade. Sometimes he sniffed around the grass. But he always stayed close. Every time Rafi looked around, he saw the little puppy watching him with trusting eyes. When evening arrived, the sky turned orange and gold. Rafi stood on the porch again. He looked at the open land. Manu sat beside him. The sunset made the whole world look soft. Rafi felt peaceful. He felt complete. He gently lifted Manu and held him close. The puppy placed his head near Rafi's chest. It was a simple moment, but it felt full of meaning. Rafi knew that life would bring challenges in the future. But he also knew that he and Manu would face everything together. They would grow side by side. They would learn from each other. They would share each day with trust. Rafi smiled as the sky slowly turned darker. Manu stayed still in his arms. In that moment it was clear that they had both found what they needed. They had found comfort. They had found friendship. They had found a new beginning. And that was the gentle story of a giant cowboy who paid $1 for a small puppy at an auction. A simple choice that changed two lives forever.